packet, and I won't belabor a ton, but what I'd like to do is ask the panelists to introduce themselves and give an example of a not-for-profit partnership that's been particularly impactful. So we'll start with Joan and come on down this way.
Sure. Thanks, everybody. I am Joan McDonald, and I am the Director of Operations for Westchester County. I deal primarily in the, Emily and I split our responsibilities quite a bit. I deal a lot in the physical infrastructure world, which does not have a lot of nonprofit services that they provide. All of the infrastructure world is primarily for-profit, contractors, engineering firms, planning companies, etc. So what I thought I would do is take a little bit of a non-traditional route and talk about those organizations that we work with that are not-for-profit in nature. Their organization is not-for-profit, but they are made up of for-profit entities. And two of the organizations that we work with are the Westchester County Association, and I'm going to talk about that for just a minute, and the Construction Industry Council. And being able to have a partnership, which we have very strong partnerships with these two organizations, helps us get advocacy message out when it comes to federal legislation, state legislation, and also to get word out to their member organizations. And in particular, when it comes to the county associations, we've had a long-standing relationship where it comes to dealing with the digital divide and how we work on that cooperatively, sustainability and small cities and how we make sure that we have TOD and other initiatives underway. And then last but not least, we've had a long-standing relationship with the County Association on Workforce Development. It goes back to when Nita Lowy was Congresswoman and chair of the Appropriations Committee, and we got funding after the county got funding after the 2008-2009 financial situation, financial meltdown, to transition people who had been in public finance, banking, into the healthcare world. $10 million grant came from the Federal Department of Labor, and it was because of the partnership between the County of Westchester and the County Association, getting that money out the door and getting people trained. And we continue to do that. The county has invested over $3 million with the County Association to pivot and do different types of training. So I just want to emphasize having those partnerships with nonprofit organizations that their members are made up of for-profit entities is a valuable partnership for the county to have.
I think our audience today is probably oriented more on the human services side, so, and I think it's so important to bring in the breadth of it all. Emily?
Thank you, and good afternoon. I'm Emily Saltzman. I'm Deputy Director of Operations. As Joan mentioned, I work a little more closely with the human services organizations. I think we are extremely fortunate in Westchester to have the kind of not-for-profits and the not-for-profit leaders that we have, many of whom are in this room. But I do have to start with how we work with Jan Fisher and Nonprofit Westchester. Jan and I have a very direct relationship, sometimes almost sibling-like, and we can speak very openly to each other. This is a problem for the not-for-profit sector, and that's important that Jan can say that. I can't fix every problem, but I really want to know that there's a problem. And likewise, we worked together especially closely during COVID to figure out, we knew we had some federal money and we were grateful to have it, but working with Jan, we made sure that this was money and the program that we set up would be effective for not-for-profits and also not onerous. I know that county contracting can be challenging, and I feel fortunate to have that kind of relationship with the person who represents the sector so well, and we're always talking about everything, even sometimes something that I wouldn't necessarily think. Jan is seeing it through a not-for-profit lens, and that's really helpful. So I have some other examples, but I think I'll start with
that. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mastrogiacomo. I am the proud community school leader for the Ossining School District. And I have had the opportunity in this role to work with so many different nonprofit organizations around supporting our staff, our students, and our families in Austin. All of them, I know, kind of what you were just saying, I can call them, I can talk to them, I can ask them for whatever we need or an idea that we may have, so I'm so fortunate for all of them. One that I'm going to mention, because I feel like they're sort of not on everyone's radar, is 914 Cares. This is an organization that supports school districts and other organizations with anywhere from clothing bundles to hygiene products, period products, and much, much more.
Awesome. Just hand the mic down here. Brett?
First of all, I should congratulate you on finding this space. My name is Ray Sanchez. I'm the superintendent of the Tarrytown schools. Prior to that, I was in the Ossining School District for approximately 11 years. I believe strongly in partnerships with not-for-profits. Truthfully, at the core of our work as educators, I think it's important. I was just looking at my cell phone and thinking about the not-for-profits in many ways being like different apps that you need to really try to address various needs that you have within the context of your community versus, that rotary phone we used to have in the past where the mindset of schools was probably just educate kids and bring them home. We are the hub, I think, for a lot of the services and the relationships that are built among families and really can strengthen some of the work in addressing various needs. I'm going to make a reference a not-for-profit combination that I think has been really beneficial to both spaces in which I've been able to serve, and that is a combination of working with United Way and also Feeding Westchester. We've worked really closely to try to address food insecurity through our partnerships with Feeding Westchester in a variety of ways, from what used to be the backpack program where students were provided food and took them home to formal trucks that were basically located and families could come and access food. But more recently, in partnership with United Way and Feeding Westchester, and their collaboration with DoorDash, we've started to bring food to the families, which helps to avoid some of those barriers that we know exist. Even though you can provide access, sometimes time can be an issue for families in terms of when you're providing that access, the location that you're providing that access to food could be a challenge for some. So we've worked hard to develop a plan that is more like a peapod, i.e. families get the food delivered to them, which has been highly successful, and quite honestly it also provides a level of dignity and service that we're hoping to provide for our families as well. So that collaboration has been very strong, and quite honestly what I'll refer to in many ways to like a game changer for many of our families.
Awesome. It's great up here to have, the county perspective and obviously the perspective of school districts. We are mostly going to talk about and hopefully get some awesome questions about, not-for-profit partnership, but obviously we discussed this a little bit in the planning. There's intergovernment partnerships that you guys are utilizing every day and partnerships between school districts and government, I think a little bit highlighted by COVID and that need that emerged. Can you just touch on kind of the partnerships amongst units of government and school districts to kind of meet the needs of our community?
Sure, I'll start. And first and foremost, I think everybody knows this, but I think it bears repeating. When March 11th, 2020 hit and we shut down, we had no game plan. Everything that we did through the middle of 2021, we made up as we went along. So when people say there's no innovation in government, they're wrong. They are absolutely wrong, and I firmly believe, and I've worked in different levels of government, that government saved the country. The local and state government, in this instance, saved the country. They saved Westchester, they saved us. We lost a lot of people, but were it not for government and everything that I had learned and nothing that I had learned in emergency preparedness prepared us for what we had to do in COVID. And there's a lot of examples we could give, but one that really sticks out in my mind is our remote learning centers. So if you remember in 2020 when everything shut down, children of essential workers might not have had a place to go because the schools were shut down. So the county government, working with our not-for-profits, our Boys and Girls Clubs, our YWCAs, our YMCAs, working with Jan, we came up with a model where we worked with the state because we couldn't set up child care centers because that took certain licensing. And we set up remote learning centers. And then we used our facilities, and it was open to grocery store workers, transit workers, our correction officers that were essential workers. And then when summer came, we used our parks. We continued the program in our county park system. And that to me is just one great example of how we came together. And if it wasn't for county government, the not-for-profit sector, and state government, we wouldn't have made it happen.
I think when we're turning county centers into hospitals overnight,
That was another.
the innovation of government was actually on full display in these
Yep,
last number of years, for sure. How about from the school district perspective on this question, just in terms of partnership with government, partnership with the towns that you're located in, in addition to the not-for-profit side of partnership? Megan, you're on it. You guys must have worked together in Ossining.
That was just an argument. First of all, I need to say it out loud, and I mean this sincerely, that we, at least from a school district perspective, and I think all of us, are very fortunate to work and have such great individuals working at the county offices, and both Joan and Emily were great during COVID, and they said everything that Joan just referenced before. We did not have a script, but we met weekly, and the county executive made it a priority that we talked every week to hear what school districts were dealing with, facing at the time, and there was action associated with it. So it was more than just words, it was real deep discussions around what's happening, and the needs in various districts were very different. But I do want to openly thank the county executive, Joan and Emily and the team for their support, because that's what we needed at the time. And we really did come together, and that has been my experience. I'll call it the DC stage before COVID, during COVID, DC, and AC after COVID. It's all been the same consistent relationship with county government. But that being said, I think, in terms of like the work together, I go back, particularly as it relates to, during our time during COVID, is, the supports around technology support for our families. We learned a great deal about our families, more so than we knew before. We thought we knew our families, and we knew a lot, but really what it started to reveal is what we didn't know. Number one, the living conditions of some of our students, families, some of the challenges families were facing. Even though we gave hotspots, giving one hotspot was not enough for a family when you had 3 or 4 children in the home and competing for internet service. But the truth is that we've all worked together with non-for-profits to get even more access, and even local government to get additional services so that we can really address the inequities that started to surface during that period of time. So the technology element of this really started to elevate, and that's one that we worked on together to make sure that there was access and that we addressed various needs, and continue to do so even now.
So I'm going to speak to just a quick bright spot that came out of COVID and working in the Ossining School District, and as Ray has shared, that the needs were profound, right? And we knew that so many people needed access to essential items, to food, to books, just to any sort of resources. So Ray was driving up to Vermont over the summer, I think it was in 2021, and he said, I have an idea. He said, we need to create Ossining Prime. And I said, what does that mean? It's like Amazon? He's like, exactly. He's like, we have all of these amazing organizations that are working with us, that are giving us items, and let's turn this into a resource hub for our families. And that's exactly what we did, and currently still have running in Ossining. We have Prime, which is our community school resource hub, and all of the non-for-profits are the wheels that keep us turning. They provide us with everything in our space that we in turn give to our families. In addition to that, families come to us and we share different resources within our community that can help them. So if we don't have what they need, we can give them information to either something in the county or something locally right in Ossining.
That's awesome. We won't spend the whole time on COVID. We get plenty of that in these sessions these days. But it is such an amazing case study. Something hit us that we could have never anticipated in the way the county had to change, the way MPW had to change, the Community Foundation, United Way, schools, and I know obviously you're a community school leader. Kind of all schools have learned they kind of have to be community schools because we're serving whole students, we're serving whole families, just like we feel in the housing and homelessness space, et cetera. Gonna drill in a little bit to the actual direct partnership between government and not-for-profits and the county contracting side. Joan, you've been very vocal, you've been on the record about the bid process, about the need for folks when applying to RFPs and looking to partner with the county to not underbid themselves, to not chase the low bid. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I've heard you talk about that a few times.
So I'll start and then I'll turn it over to Emily.
Excellent.
One of the things that we really both collaboratively work with our different departments is educating them in that the only thing that really has to be low bid by law are construction contracts. Public works contracts in county government are the only things that have to be low bid. And there was a whole mentality within a lot of the employees in county government that when we award contracts, it also has to be the lowest price. And we're of the view that it's better to be best value. And the best value means, can you provide the service at a fair price? And when you put in your proposal, give us your fair price. And it means educating the workforce that it's like, well, we think this is a better service that this not-for-profit can provide, but they're 6% higher than not-for-profit provider B. So it is really kind of changing the dialogue.
I hope everyone's taking that note.
Turn it over to Abby.
So before I get on the super fun topic of nonprofit contracts, I do want to talk a little bit about, go back to what Rich is talking about, the partnership. Because the partnership for us in the county is so much more than money and contracts. We rely on all of you for information. I call United Way. I speak to Tom and Linny. What's happening? What are the calls about? I call Kathy Hallis many times. What's happening in child care? How can we address the issue of worker shortages? We put together the first ever county maternal mortality program because I could do it with Cheryl Brannon. We don't know everything and we don't think we know everything and we have to. We rely on you. And one message that I hope you'll take is that I hope you realize we want this relationship to be year-round and not just when the contracting season or the budget is being discussed, because you have so much valuable information that helps us help people, and that is why we are in government, to help people. Now on to the contracting process.
Sorry, I jumped right in. You're right.
That I'd like to recognize, first of all, we have a lot of our wonderful county folks, so if everybody who works for the county could stand up, we did force them to come to this one path to success is hire the best people, which I think that we've done, but I really do want to give a shout out to Steph Basilin. When I first got to Westchester County, and a lot of the nonprofit Westchester and some other groups had said, you got to help us with the contracting process. It's onerous for our organizations. And I asked a lot of questions and found in the county that the person who seemed to have all of the answers was Stephanie. So we created the role of Chief Nonprofit Contracting Officer. And together we have explored this process. It is long and challenging. Some of it is just practice. It's always been done this way, and other times there's a legal reason or a finance reason why it has to be. So we are midway through this process. We've hired an outside consultant. They've sat down with a lot of county departments and with Jan and some of her colleagues, and we're looking to do things, some of the bigger things to make it easier for you to contract, and some of the smaller things, for example. And I don't know why it has taken so long, but we are close to an e-signature program. We had that during COVID, and I will say, COVID, for me and Joan, people who've been in government a long time, COVID was a really great opportunity. A number of procurement processes were relaxed, and we allowed, for whoever says you can't have you have to have a wet signature, somehow during COVID lived with an electronic signature. And to my knowledge, no one died because we had electronic signatures. So that means that we can continue to improve the process, and we are going to do that. And we you have our word of continuing to try to work with you to make it less onerous, to get the payments faster. And some of it is, as Joan said, making sure that the contract and the contract that you have signed enables you to provide the service with reasonable wages for your staff and all of the things that you need. And perhaps, maybe there are things that you were going to do that we both agree shouldn't be part of this contract, so that it is manageable for everyone. But I think it's really an ongoing dialogue with us, which is of tremendous value to all of us, to hear from you, to hear about your clients, to hear about your staff, to hear about the services most in need and how we can work together.
Yeah, I'll just back this up a little bit. As one of your partners, obviously on the homeless side, we're having, for every one conversation about contracts, probably 9 others on how are things going, what do we need there, can I introduce you to so-and-so, I think they can help there. It's about, answering the call. I was really happy today, obviously our county executive kicked off things this morning. We contract with the not-for-profit sector to get things done better, and I think, make a quick plug for MPW and some of our efforts around equitable contracting, but it used to always be better and more cost-effective. I think we're much more focused these days on better and at a fair price, right? Like better and at a fair price. And when we talk about equitable contracting, which is our main legislative item both locally and at the state level, and there's some encouraging bills, on the state side too, it's getting paid on time, it's getting contracts executed on time, but the part that you said about fair wages in the contracts, that we're paying our frontline employees equitable wages, I think that underpins all of the equitable contracting. So, appreciate that. Let me get to the school district side a little bit. We talked a little bit about needs that were highlighted during the COVID pandemic and things that emerged there, but how are you identifying needs on an ongoing basis, and how are you finding your way to new partners or finding areas where partnership makes best sense for you all?
Sure. I think before we get to that, I think the most important piece of all of this is building relationships and getting to know who is in your community, who are the non-for-profits in Ossining, in our surrounding areas, and really just making the time to get to know them. And remember when we started the Community School Initiative in Ossining, Ray and I met continuously with partners and organizations, just so they can hear our mission, to know our goals, and to understand, who we are as a district, who the students are, and where we wanted to take them. And I think that was really important. And then as, you continue on with the work is, one, celebrating successes and celebrating things that are happening, and then also just using data that are, one, from the school district as a whole, two, from actual participants in programs that you're having, or just even people that are coming to the center and how they feel about being part of it. And then also hearing from our staff, our building leaders, our teachers, that our teachers are with our kids, and almost always the first person that a child will tell something to, and just getting information from them and having that open communication, I think has been very important. But really, when it comes down to this work, I really believe that it's about relationships and just getting to know people, and just, continuing the conversation.
100%. Ray, you want to jump in here?
Sure. So I just jotted down a few notes as I was thinking a little bit more about the questions. Number one, there is no single story, right? So that is why I share that, is that it's incumbent upon us to really understand the families and the students and their stories, so that we can best adapt our systems around the needs that are there. The way we did things 10 years ago are going to be quite different than the way we do things now, because we should be adapting and we should be changing. The data that we're looking at is not so different than many of your organizations, both qualitative and quantitative, right? We're getting, our academic data, we get information from the county in terms of what we know about our region and our local school districts and what they're noticing, and about the needs within said community. And then it's about really creating plans and thinking really carefully about who can help. I want to echo what Megan said. These relationships matter. It's not uncommon to carry a card and just say, superintendent, and this is my district, and these are some of the things that the district provides and what we're hoping to achieve. And more often than not, there are not-for-profits that want to help and support. And quite honestly, the other side of it is, even if it's services that we already do provide, what I've often talked about staff is that let the not-for-profit provide it, and then we'll go out to do something different, right? Some of those things that were on the list that we couldn't get to because we didn't have the capacity, now we might be able to get to that set area. So it's not a, for instance, extreme loss of job, but it now gives you an asset in a very different way. But I do want to share that oftentimes the not-for-profits also have to be aligned with your missions. So we sit down deep and have those various conversations around the things that we want to achieve and how they align with the vision of the not-for-profit that we're hoping to collaborate with. I treat it not so differently than hiring staff. I take that very, very seriously. Who's going to be working with our students, who's going to be working directly with our families matters. It's probably the most important decision that I make as a superintendent or as a leader. And when I seek to invite a not-for-profit to work alongside our staff, work and provide direct services to our families, it's a very similar entry point. I want to really understand, who's coming to the table, their ability to meet the needs, because if we are going to make a promise, we want to make sure that promise is met. And by all accounts, it's been humbling to see how everyone's really come together on behalf of communities to best serve them under what is not a different framework, but a framework called community schools. And that's in essence what many of us are seeking to provide. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
You must be an educator with all those notes. It'd be nice also if all of our districts in Westchester had such an accessible superintendent that's so plugged in. One thing for all of us, I think, and it's an easy example a little bit with schools, listening to teachers, listening to parents, but we're probably all asking our staff and asking people we serve, hey, we gave you A, how's A? And we don't always say, what are we not giving you, right? We're very good at evaluating the things that we give because we think we have the answers. So I think, understanding those gaps. I was going to ask, kind of the same version of that, a different version of that question to the county of how are you looking at data and the needs of our county to identify where you need new partnerships or where there's emerging trends of need. Emily?
Well, I think probably the best known example of it, and then Joan can talk about some of the ways we've addressed it, is our housing needs assessment. We all knew that there was a housing crisis, so to speak, in Westchester County, a lot of demand, but having numbers was very, very helpful. For example, what we found was that there was not a single community that didn't have a significant gap between the cost of rent and the average wage. So this wasn't someone else's problem. This was everybody's problem. And that was very helpful to us. As you know, the county executive is accessibly, goes to a lot of communities. And he could go to every single community in Westchester and say, you have a housing problem, we have the numbers to prove that. And I think that that is a very good example. Everybody uses our housing needs assessment, the approach to it, and the data to talk about this problem in Westchester County.
So I'm going to be a little bit more direct in that I think data is extremely important, but data is useless if you don't build programs from them. So picking up on the housing needs assessment, under this county executive, more has been done for housing than at any time in the history of this county. We have put in the 6 years of our administration close to $300 million between New Homes Land for property acquisition and the infrastructure fund. We are rolling out right now, which is the first of its kind in the state, if not the country, our Housing Flex Fund, where we are investing $100 million of our ARPA money, our federal COVID money, to build housing for families making less than 65% of AMI. That has not been done before, and we will be making direct payments to developers to get that housing built. So that's one example. Another example is our police reform task force, again working with mental health not-for-profit providers, is we have Project Alliance, which is 8 partnerships between local police departments, our county Office of Community Mental Health, Department of Public Safety and Emergency Services, the not-for-profit providers, working to minimize the number of police response that we have in using mental health response when 911 calls come in to our. So, and then the third, which I will give Emily all the credit for, and Sue Weissman, which is our food insecurity program. We started out with putting a significant amount of money into food insecurity as part of our COVID response, and we have continued that program, getting money to the various food pantries. So data is great, but unless you have programs to address what those data needs are, it's just numbers on a piece of paper.
Yeah, well said. And connects, if you were in this session this morning to our data session, sometimes you collect all this data. Lim, you might have been the one that said this. If you don't use it, you know, if you try to prove a thesis you already established, then you really probably don't care about the data that comes in. Some of us use the housing needs assessment data every single day, so we appreciate that. I'll mention one more. You know, Westhab operates a shelter for asylum seekers in Yonkers that opened more or less overnight, and suddenly Emily and I are on the phone together, and Westhab knows how to run a homeless shelter. We know very little about immigration law. We certainly don't know about getting everyone health screened, etc. And, you know, take like the 4 years of COVID, well, this was like a 1 week thing where we had to make all these resources move. It wasn't transactional at all. We had community health centers showing up at our front door to do what they do. We had Neighbors Link, you know, coming to the site to do legal intakes, etc. And, you know, this is an interesting one because New York City funds the shelter operation, but they don't fund all these other things. And then we're constantly having conversations. What about transportation? What about childcare? And we're still working out, you know, those challenges on the fly. So.
On that, I do want to credit again the response Westchester County had. We are fortunate that we have a lot of very well-meaning, caring people in this county. But Jan Fisher and Faith and Tom and Corolla and Kathy wanted to make sure that we didn't have a situation where 2 days after these buses brought these families, and it was a very fraught time, as you'll recall, people started driving up to unload their used stained clothing. We wanted it to be effective and collaborative, and I really credit our nonprofit sector for talking to one another. What will the need be? How will we produce it? And I think that was unique in making sure that the approach was coordinated. And even on the local level, I must give an amazing shout out to Mayor Nancy Kabulian of Ardsley. That woman is unbelievable. She has really, she sent out one of the most beautiful emails initially when the community was very concerned about how unless she had checked the census and unless your family came on the Mayflower, everybody in Ardsley originally came from someone else. I credit her with setting the tone appropriately, but she has pulled in all kinds of partners, food pantries, churches. Shari lives near in Dobbsbury, so knows a lot of people in Dobbs are supporting Ardsley. But it's that same kind of leadership to find out what the needs are, bring the right people together, and sometimes even, believe it or not, say, no, we don't need that right now, we need this. But I also want to say that the asylum seekers in our hotels and in other communities have also added demand to our not-for-profits. And I know from Deborah Blatt, I think she's in the room from Sharing Shelf, that one thing that you all have told me, and I really get, is we can't ask Deborah, okay, we need you to find clothing for 10,000 more people, but do it in your own budget. Government isn't asked that, and so we don't ask you that. So we do understand when demand goes up, the cost of providing services. But I do want to explain one thing, which is as the government, we are here to help you, but we are dealing with a lot of competing needs. And you need to keep that in mind. We have a range of needs, some of which you may not even be aware of. We have on the county executives team amazing liaisons who work with different sectors of our community. And so that's very helpful. They're always bringing issues to us, but Joan and I are constantly balancing how are we going to manage all of those needs, from an infrastructure that was ignored for 8 years to the significant human services needs that we have. So we are doing our best, and we're always willing to take input, but really balancing a very broad array of needs.
Yeah, absolutely. Not to give our not-for-profit sector just such a big victory lap at the end of the day, but for those of us that have been coming to this summit for 15, 20 years, right, we're at a place where, and I think it's really valid through the work of MPW, United Way, and so many of the other actors we've named, where it's become less transactional, less competitive. Probably all of us, right, in our inbox, get a RFP opportunity or grant opportunity that we forward to someone else that can do that work better, right? Or see something and go, oh, you know, who would work well with me on this would be so-and-so. And I mean, I hope you feel that evolution. I have felt it in my career, but it's so much more, even the language we're using straight down the panel, of trying to meet the needs of our community, not trying to grow my organization or win the race or get the contract. It's not a get the contract, it's meet the need, sometimes alone, sometimes with partners, pretty much always with partners. And I think that's kind of woven into all of this, but I do think our sector has evolved in a very real way on the ground every day. I know that our audience, to round out the day, probably has really great questions for this very important panel. I'm going to ask you one more, and then so get your questions ready. And just about how you evaluate the success of a partnership. So each of you work with lots of different partners to get lots of things done. How do you know it's working? And obviously data is part of that answer, but how do you make sure the partnerships that you have are meeting the needs of the community? Or anything else that you want to pick up on that we said throughout the hour that I totally missed? Ray, I believe in you. And get your burning questions for our...
By the way, I was struck by, I put in stars, like how the response that e-signatures got from this group.
Yes. The small things matter. The small things matter.
I'm going to say every once in a while, if there's a lull in the conversation, I'll bring up e-signatures. So how do I measure the success? I mean, from a school district, you know, what I wanted to share, and I'll tie it into this question is, and it goes back to the data. We actually went through an exercise once where we took our student achievement data and we put it into, basically, we looked at the locations and where students lived within the context of our schools. And we dropped it into a database, and it gave us basically like this Google map, or like a heat map, that started to identify areas where we started to see where it started to give us patterns of where students might be living that aren't achieving. And we started to make a correlation that many of the students were also living in poverty. And so why I share that is because that data, which was referenced before in terms of how you use it, we started to think very differently about the way we started to address various components of the community without, doing it with dignity, but trying to address it in a variety of ways, right? Because that false data could be used in a harmful way in some ways, so we have to be really cautious about that. But we brought non-for-profits in. We did this very discreetly, but overtly at the same time. We're really trying to say, okay, we're going to go out into the community, we're going to try to bring services out there, we're going to work very differently once we have this information. So I do want to share that piece, and honestly, what we started to see is, number one, student achievement for some of the students started to move. We started to see more of our families entering our schools, so psychological safety started to get built. And we started to really address, Maslow before Bloom, right? We started to address some of those fundamental needs, and keeping count of what that meant. How many bags of clothing did we give away? How many books did we give away? So that it's quantifiable, and we report back to our Board of Education, we report back to our, our school district and our community. And it's important that we're over and also celebrating the good work that individuals are doing on behalf of the community. So, I share that because to me, and lastly, when you see a smile brought forth to a child, that's the greatest evaluation of anything. When you can bring and you provide them something that they otherwise didn't have. And I'll just share that I'm a child that was born in poverty. I remember going to the community center and getting blocks of cheese with grandma. So when I was provided something that I know others had and brought some dignity to me as an individual, it went a long way. And what it meant for me in terms of my affect was very, very different. And my performance in the classroom changed as well. So, I think those are things that we start to think about when it relates to our children, our families, and the work we do on behalf of communities.
I'll just add to that. I think specifically thinking about Old Prime and how I know that space is a successful space is thinking about where it was and how it was just this idea, and now we're a functioning space that is offering English classes 2 times a week. We have our new families that are arriving in Ossining that come downstairs and ask us for resources or heard about us and said, can you help? And then also just having our staff, and our administrators having an idea or needing a resource and coming to us to say, can you help us, or do you know of a partnership that can help us with this? And then this conversation and this model has continued to be a part of who we are as a school.
So I'm going to talk about the eviction prevention program. We got federal money to help people with rent arrears during COVID. And we were trying to decide if we should turn it over to the state or keep it here. And I was thinking, well, if we keep it here, we'll control it. And Joan said, Emily, if the state is setting up a program, I think you should send the money to the state. And Joan is absolutely right, as she almost always is. And we did that. But what we did do was kept $2 million we were allowed an admin piece. We took that $2 million and gave it out to not-for-profit organizations because we knew, and many of you know our planning commissioner, Blanca Lopez, who before she was planning commissioner, before she came into the government, had worked on housing issues for a not-for-profit in Westchester, going with people to housing court, etc. So we set up a program where we gave the not-for-profits money to help people who had rent arrears due to COVID apply for this money. It was a little bit of a cumbersome process. You had to answer a lot of questions. You had to get the landlord buy-in as well, obviously, to prevent fraud. Westchester County sent $47 million to New York State, who took a little while, but they did ultimately get a program up, and we got $70 million back for our residents for rental arrears, utility arrears, and in some instances, prospective rent. That, to me, we could not have done it without our nonprofit partners, and that is a tremendous return on an investment that most importantly kept people in their homes with the dignity, health, and everything else that implies.
I'm going to talk about the macro picture. And I remember, when Emily and I came in on 1/1/2018 with George, and a budget mess, and the controller, put us in fiscal stress. The rating agencies downgraded us, and we had a couple of collective bargaining agreements that were signed but had no money behind them. And then we had collective bargaining agreements that hadn't been negotiated with CSEA nurses that are our biggest workforce. And when we came in 2018, because Westchester County's budget is calendar year, we inherited the budget. And then we worked with the Board of Legislators and developed our first budget for 2019. And we had to dip into the reserves to pay for those collective bargaining contracts. And our reserves at that point was about 17 million. And we presented a budget to the Board of Legislators that we had to raise taxes a little bit, but we didn't cut any programs, and we didn't fire any county employees. And that started a trend wherein every year thereafter, we increased funding to not-for-profits. We increased funding for programs. We got very good collective bargaining agreements for our workforce. And in the last 5 years, we've been able to do it without increasing property taxes, and at the same, and also done some tax cuts. But we were able to do it and also increase funding to the not-for-profit world by close to 40%. And I think, one of the things that George often says when he speaks to different groups is a lot of people don't know what county government entails. One of his famous lines is, you don't know how the sewer system works. You hopefully won't have to be in the county jail. But there are members of our community that need the social services programs that you all provide. And to me, when I look at the macro picture, the fact that under George's leadership, we've been able to continue to provide these services, provide you with the funds that you need to provide these services. That's the accomplishment that I look at.
Really know how to stitch this whole thing together, huh? So we have about 10 minutes, and we'll open it up to some Q&A. Probably a small enough room that I can just have for that. So Deborah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to stand up.
Just be nice and loud.
Okay, I think I can do that. So one of the ways in which, I'm the founder and executive director of the Sharing Child, Westchester County's Clothing Bag for Children. In 2003, we launched something called Teen Boutique in real life, which is a permanent free store for teens. We collaborate really well with community organizations, and we collaborate really well with the principal of Portchester High School. One of the challenges we have is getting teens to Teen Boutique. So some school districts you get that hesitance, the waiver, transportation, they don't have a discretionary budget. There's this, as I think I say this to the educators in the room, you particularly know that the new studies that have come out attribute learning, the inability to catch up to learning loss, to the fact that we can't, there's so many more absences now, and one reason of many driving absences is lack of access to clean clothing. So we have this free store. It's there, it's open during the day, it's open on the weekends, it's open after school, but we need some type of collaboration with the schools where we have a bus budget, or is it what type of situation? So in a sense, I want to figure out how we bring this all together so that we can keep these teens in school. We all know dignity is what they need. Clothing choice for a teenager, you can pack a wardrobe pack for a little kid. But if you're 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 years old, letting them choose their own clothes, empowering them to choose their own clothes. So this is basically, question to you is thinking caps. How do we get to these other principals, these other districts and say, 200 or 300 bucks is gonna rent the bus and get the kids down there. How do we do it?
Megan, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So we've done something similar in Ossining, and actually what we have done is just have done pop-up shops in the schools. So I don't know if that's something.
Yeah, so we have, it's very, very labor and time intensive, so we do the pop-up events. And haven't talked about that further. But yeah. But I think
That was just an
Yeah.
idea that came to my mind, but.
Yeah.
There's two forms of shared decision. We can do it together, or we can just tell them and then share the decision with them. I'm just kidding. But I think the distance is a barrier, and it's real, right? And I would also love to talk about what it means for the students that are on that bus, right? And what I mean by that is, how will they feel that they're taking a bus to a very, great location with various resources, but I'm that child, right? And I hope I'm describing it well, right? So, and how they may need to identify themselves as those kids that are needing clothing, right? And with good intentions, they may have some other stigma, they may have a stigma associated with it. So I think there's just some nuances associated with it. We're not here to create barriers. We're hopefully here to, demolish some of those barriers so that we can provide resources. I wonder if there's ways, and I know it's labor intensive, where we can do things more regionally in some ways. Port Chester's here, but Tarrytown and Ossining and other districts might be in a set location. Maybe there's a space there. So I think coming to the table, thinking about what the challenges are, and transportation is costly, right? For a school district, for a bus is astronomical, like the numbers associated with it. But maybe there's other ways in which we can do this and still meet the goal, and not make it another level of, needing more human capital than you currently have. So we can think those together. And and honestly, going back, I know we want to move away from COVID, but that's what the process was. We came to the table, we thought about it. Each community was a little bit different, and George and the team and everyone here we came up with solutions. And I think, that's a great model that I think we can replicate. It's not, and I know we have, and we can continue to do that. So love to talk more with you and how we can talk with other superintendents around this specific need.
Sure. I had a question in the back left, and then we'll go up here.
Yes. I, coming from a vantage point of having been worked with county government as Director of Children's Mental Health and currently President of the Board of Family Ties of Westchester, but that's not why I'm standing up. I'm standing up. Hello, Richard.
Hi.
Back in the 80s, I came together with the Ossining schools. Sandy Shelton was working with the school district, the Ossining community, and then in 8 or 9 other communities in Westchester to form what we call the community networks. And I know all of your communities have that. And I'm just thinking this is a wonderful conversation that really could take place at community networks. Because when you have a community problem that involves families, kids, schools, community agencies, I'm hoping, since I had a lot invested in this, having helped to create this in my career in county government, working with not-for-profits now as well, that these are conversations I'm hoping that the community networks are alive and well, and that you can utilize them to have discussions like that. And Ossining, of course, also has communities that care and things like that. So this is really speaking from the passion of my life and having continued to work with these things. And of course, I invite you all to the Myra Alfred's Roundtable.
To continue the conversation, let's hear a quick note from the superintendent.
So, first of all, thank you for everything you did. And,
of course.
And I think, the other part of it too is, and I think what you're referencing is how do we create structures and systems so that it doesn't become a one-time event,
Yeah.
right? Because we can all come to the table, share, this is what we're going to do, and then it's similar to the data conversation. We just sit or we don't take action on it. So having continuous, whether they're quarterly, coalitions, are really, really helpful. But it's an opportunity to celebrate, share how we're working, what we're noticing in the services and the needs of the community so that we can adapt and change. And that's something I would encourage communities to consider, including school districts. Because again, we can have the one time, bring everyone together, talk about how we're going to work together, and then we disperse and 2 years out and say we should go back to that conversation. It's a continuous dialogue that's really, really important. And those structures are really, really critical. That comes from leadership and then working with non-for-profits to figure out different ways. And no longer do we need to worry about distance, because if there's another thing that came out of COVID is we no longer call each other. When we call each other, we send each other a link to Google Meet and to Zoom. We can now have face-to-face time and get and accomplish much of what we wanted to otherwise in person. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Let's move to the question up here.
I'm with Meals on Wheels of White Plains, a small not-for-profit. Westchester operates on a model where each town and city and area has its own home delivered meals program. Some of them are funded by the county and partnering with the county. Others are like mine, where we have a nice little partnership. High school does the staging area. I have a commercial real estate developer who donates the office space. The city planning department gives us a community development block grant. The rest is funded by a fee for service on a sliding scale and donations. Okay, we made it through COVID. Okay, now we're at a point where people are senior citizens and so forth, they cannot afford a fee for service. It's gone down. I've got out of 80 clients, 64 pay zero. Okay, and it's not sustainable. Okay, we're operating on cash reserves. And so the question now becomes, and I've looked at other people's 990s, and they're operating on cash reserves. Okay, so the question now becomes is, do we partner with other people in the county? If so, who do we partner with? Do we merge? Do I look at being acquired? What do I do next? Okay, because if I'm not here, the community is not going to get served. Okay, maybe you do Peapod. Okay, realize the school can do Peapods to my people. We're going to do this to the school kids, do it to the senior citizens. But somebody's got to serve these people at some point, and I don't know what to do next.
So
that's
you're
where
going to, after the panel, you're going to talk to Susan Wiseman, and we created this food security coordinator position for exactly that. But I will say, this is a challenging time for our residents, and especially individuals living on fixed incomes, which describes many, many of our seniors. The fastest growing sector of our population is 85 and above. And rents are going up, even rents in places that were traditionally much lower rents. The cost of everything is much higher, and so that you are facing a challenge. Many people who were able to get by are having that much of a harder time. But Sue is the
It's happening live.
and this is something that we do talk about. Is we have 45 municipalities in this county. Some are tiny and some are big cities. And sometimes it's hard to have everything just provided locally. White Plains is a big city, so I'm not saying it's too small. It is challenging, but
Yeah.
talk to Susan.
Yeah, okay, I'm glad this happened. As we wrap up here too, I'll just say, obviously, it's hard to fully address, a specific issue like that. It's good, it's good. But, a lot of things that we talk about around partnerships, and we have lots of very effective but small not-for-profits, and how hard it is to function in a very small niche space. And there have been sessions in previous summits around consolidations and mergers, as you mentioned, or ways to form strategic partnerships. There are plenty of not-for-profits that in one way or another share a back office, or all these different ways that we collaborate to make sure that the folks that need the meals aren't going to not get the meals. but different structures to deliver those services.
Yeah.
I want to do 2 quick rounds of applause here, one for our incredible panel today. And because we're so lucky you joined us at the end of the summit, thank you to United Way and Tom Gabriel. Come ask some tough questions after. Enjoy the great weather. Thanks, everyone.